move into closing statements. I recognize the ranking member for his closing statement.
Chairman Comer, thank you. You know, some of our colleagues today have been assailing endless wars and hopeless wars and so on, and that rhetoric resonates with me. I grew up with the central image of World War II as the paradigm of a just and defensive war that unifies the country and that ends actually with the elevation of democracy and human rights over authoritarianism and fanaticism. But so many of the wars of our times have been failures. The Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, the war on drugs, all of them wrapped up with corruption, profit-taking, and massive loss of civilian life. And it would be wonderful indeed to have a serious investigation of the Afghanistan war, all 20 years of it, and it would be a wonderful thing to have an investigation of all these wars and whether war works today. But that was not this hearing. The purpose of this hearing obviously was to belatedly score a few cheap political points at the expense of President Biden. The Afghan war was our longest war, and there was broad bipartisan consensus it was time to end it and bring the troops home. And there are lots of members over on that side of the aisle, including our distinguished chairman, who were demanding that the troops come home and demanding an end to the war. Now, President Biden, whose administration constituted, by my reckoning, 2.8% or 3% of the duration of the Afghan war, inherited an impossible situation as a result of a series of disastrous decisions. I think Mr. Sopko has proven that in his reports, but specifically, most recently, the disastrous decisions of President Donald Trump. While he was in office, Trump entered into a bizarre, lopsided Trump-Taliban agreement that not only excluded the Afghan government from the negotiations, but then proceeded to negotiate the release of 5,000 jailed Afghan so-called freedom fighters whose ranks included terrorists. So Afghan fighters, including terrorists, were released under the terms of that agreement. And President Trump agreed to withdraw all U.S. troops by May 1st, 2021. But he left no plans for executing the withdrawal at all to his successor in office. But he moved forward with the drawdown to just 2,500 troops. So he negotiated for the release of 5,000 Taliban fighters and then drew down our troops to 2,500. And when the Afghan president and government balked at releasing those 5,000 Taliban fighters, according to the testimony of Mr. Sopko and other sources, Secretary Pompeo threatened to withhold aid, millions of dollars in aid from the Afghan government if they didn't go along with the release of these Taliban fighters. President Trump also gutted the special immigrant visa program, which is supposed to allow Afghan allies to seek refuge in the United States. With only 3 months left under the timeline set by the Trump-Taliban agreement, Biden faced an impossible choice: pull out of the agreement entirely and then send more troops into Afghanistan to face renewed attacks from an emboldened and resurgent Taliban, with everybody telling him to get out and attacking him, or carry out the withdrawal set into motion by his predecessor, which is what would be done normally from one presidency to the next. Unlike his predecessor, Biden extensively consulted his national security advisors and military leadership, and he made difficult decisions informed by the best available intelligence. The administration conducted an historic withdrawal and non-combatant evacuation operation. 124,000 people, including not just our soldiers and civilians and contractors, but Afghan nationals, evacuated in just 17 days. The last few months of the war were agonizing and deeply flawed, and we all need to recognize that. And we must always honor the heroic sacrifice of the 13th service members who were killed by ISIS in a terrorist attack during the evacuation, along with the more than 2,400 other American service members who perished in Afghanistan. But if we truly want to learn from this experience, from the mistakes of this 20-year war, We cannot focus on the last few days to the exclusion of the prior 231 months, any more than we could learn about the causes or character or conduct of the Civil War just by studying what happened at Appomattox. Meantime, we must ensure the continued support of the women and girls whose basic rights have been stripped away by the fanatical, misogynistic Taliban regime, by providing much-needed humanitarian assistance to the millions of Afghans experiencing poverty and food insecurity, while establishing the guardrails needed to prevent any funds from falling into the hands of the Taliban. Although we're no longer in Afghanistan, we have every continuing interest in seeking to determine what went wrong. And that's why it's so important that we continue to support SAGAR and work to ensure that the agencies cooperate with Mr. Sopko's requests, just as they've been cooperating with their own inspector generals. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, on drafting a bipartisan letter to relevant agencies to ensure that SAGAR has access to the information needed to carry out its mandate so we can carry out our own. Thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. As I said in my opening statement, no single hearing can tell the history of the United States war in Afghanistan. But today was a good start. And it's a good start because when the Democrats were in the majority, they held no hearings after Kabul fell. The testimony provided by today's witnesses answered questions and raised troubling new ones that this committee will pursue. The fact that the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, Mr. Sopko, today cannot confirm American tax dollars are not funding the Taliban is shameful. It's horrifying. Nearly 2 years after the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan, the United States continues to send billions of dollars to Afghanistan, which is run by the Taliban, since the country was lost in August 2021. The Biden administration is taking money out of the paychecks of American truckers, American teachers, American farmers, American builders, and American soldiers, and sending it to the same people who shot at those soldiers, who murdered those soldiers until not long ago. That is on the top of the billions of dollars in equipment left for the Taliban to use. And the Biden administration has no interest in identifying the waste, fraud, and abuse connected to Afghanistan. Mr. Sopko's testimony today that the State Department is continuing to direct its employees not to cooperate with SAGAR is shocking to me. We have demanded the administration cooperate with SAGAR, yet it continues to stonewall and ignore SAGAR's important work. Secretary Blinken will be expected to answer for this obstruction of the Inspector General. A reckless Biden administration will not avoid accountability, whether from Inspectors General or this committee. Finally, I want to respond to some of the comments made today about the necessity of this hearing, or who is to blame for the loss of America's war in Afghanistan. This hearing has been to conduct oversight. That's what this committee is meant to do. That's what Congress is meant to do. To characterize a hearing with 4 inspectors general who also conduct oversight as political theater or Monday morning quarterbacking is just, it's bizarre. The witnesses today are nonpartisan government witnesses tasked with identifying problems within their agencies. The decisions of this administration towards Afghanistan deserve the Oversight Committee's attention because, after all, it is the current administration. I think some of my friends on the other side of the aisle forget Joe Biden is the president, not Donald Trump. This committee had many hearings on the Trump administration's Afghanistan policies while President Trump was in office. Was that political theater? That there have been problems identified in the Biden administration by the Inspectors General and that this committee seeks to hear those problems is not political theater. Those problems identified in the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan were obvious to anyone who had a television in August of 2021 and witnessed the disastrous withdrawal the Biden administration oversaw. I supported withdrawing from Afghanistan. I'm grateful no additional Americans will die in Afghanistan. Joe Biden told the American people to trust him to be their commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. He lost the war in Afghanistan in 8 months. That is President Biden's legacy. And that is what the American people should and will hold him accountable for. In closing, I want to thank our panelists once again for their important and insightful testimony today. We respect and depend on the IG community for our substantive oversight work. And with that, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. If there is no further business without objection, the committee stands adjourned.